The Late Show set buzzed with its usual pre-show energy as crew members made final adjustments to lighting and cameras. Tonight's guest was supposed to be a ratings goldmine, Denzel Washington promoting his latest directorial effort, a powerful drama exploring systemic racism in America's justice system. The film had already generated Oscar buzz and critical acclaim, making Washington the perfect guest for Colbert's politically charged late-night format. Washington arrived at the Ed Sullivan Theater with his usual quiet confidence, greeting staff with handshakes and genuine warmth. Makeup artists noted how relaxed he seemed, joking about his character's intense courtroom scenes while they touched up his appearance. The veteran actor had done hundreds of these interviews, and tonight felt like just another stop on the promotional circuit. Stephen Colbert, however, had other plans brewing behind his trademark grin. During his pre-show briefing with producers, he'd been unusually animated about the interview direction. "We need to push him on the political messaging," Colbert insisted, shuffling through his note cards with aggressive enthusiasm. "This film is clearly an indictment of conservative policies. We can't let him dance around that." His producers exchanged concerned glances. Washington wasn't known for inflammatory political statements, preferring to let his work speak for itself, but Colbert seemed determined to extract something more provocative, something that would generate viral clips and social media buzz. The show's opening monologue proceeded normally, with Colbert delivering his signature blend of political commentary and sharp wit. The audience responded with their expected laughter and applause, completely unaware of the tension building backstage. Washington sat in the green room reviewing talking points with his publicist, occasionally glancing at the monitor showing Colbert's performance. "Remember, keep it focused on the craft and the story," his publicist reminded him. "Don't let him bait you into anything divisive." Washington nodded, but something in Colbert's tone during the monologue had caught his attention. The host seemed more aggressive than usual, his jokes carrying an edge that felt personal rather than purely comedic. The commercial break ended, and Colbert's voice boomed across the studio. "My next guest is the two-time Academy Award winner, whose new film is already generating serious Oscar talk. Please welcome Denzel Washington." The audience erupted as Washington strode onto the stage, his presence commanding immediate respect. He waved to the crowd with genuine appreciation, that trademark smile lighting up his face as he settled into the guest chair. The initial exchange seemed perfectly normal. Compliments about the film, discussion of Washington's directorial choices, and praise for his lead performance. But Colbert's questions began taking subtle turns, each one more loaded than the last. "Your character faces a justice system that seems rigged against him," Colbert began, leaning forward with practiced intensity. "Do you think that reflects the reality of America under conservative leadership?" Washington paused, clearly recognizing the trap being set. "I think the justice system has challenges that transcend political parties, Stephen. My focus was on telling a human story about perseverance and dignity in the face of adversity." "But surely you can't ignore the political implications," Colbert pressed, his smile becoming more forced. "Your film arrives at a time when voting rights are under attack, when certain politicians are actively working to suppress minority voices. Isn't your silence on these issues a form of complicity?" The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. Washington's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, but his voice remained steady. "I don't consider thoughtful discourse to be silence, Stephen. I believe in the power of art to open hearts and minds without beating people over the head with ideology." Colbert's mask began to slip. "That's a convenient position for someone who's benefited from Hollywood's liberal bubble. But what about your responsibility to use your platform? What about the people who don't have your privilege?" The accusation hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Washington's eyes flashed with something dangerous, his calm demeanor showing its first cracks. The audience shifted uncomfortably, sensing the interview had veered into uncharted territory. "I've spent my entire career trying to portray complex human beings with dignity and truth," Washington replied, his voice carrying a warning edge. "I don't need lectures about responsibility from someone who's made a career out of cheap shots and partisan performance art." The words hit Colbert like a physical blow. His face flushed red as he realized his guest had just publicly challenged not just his question, but his entire professional identity. The audience fell silent, uncertain, whether they were witnessing an unscripted moment or elaborate theater. But this was no performance. The tension that had been building was about to explode into something neither man could control. Colbert's eyes narrowed as he processed Washington's devastating critique. The studio audience remained frozen, unsure whether to laugh, gasp, or simply hold their breath. Behind the cameras, producers frantically gestured to each other, debating whether to cut to commercial or let the train wreck continue unfolding in real time. "Partisan performance art?" Colbert repeated, his voice dripping with wounded pride and rising anger. "That's rich coming from someone who's spent decades playing safe, avoiding any real stance on the issues that matter. At least I have the courage to take a position." Washington's composure cracked further. He shifted in his chair, no longer the relaxed movie star promoting his latest project. "Courage?" he said, his voice rising slightly. "You think hiding behind a desk making jokes about serious issues is courage? You think turning everything into a punchline is some kind of brave political statement?" The accusation struck deep. Colbert had built his entire late-night career on the premise that comedy could be a form of political resistance, that laughter was a weapon against injustice. To have that foundation questioned by one of Hollywood's most respected figures felt like a personal attack on everything he believed about himself. "I use humor to make people think," Colbert shot back, abandoning any pretense of host civility. "I use my platform to hold power accountable. What do you use yours for? Playing it safe? Making sure you don't offend anyone who might buy a movie ticket?" The gloves were completely off now. Washington leaned forward, his famous intensity now focused entirely on his host. "You want to talk about holding power accountable? Let's talk about the power you wield in this chair every night. You sit here judging everyone else's moral choices while you profit from turning serious issues into entertainment for your audience." Colbert's face went from red to nearly purple. "At least I'm not pretending to be above the fray while secretly benefiting from the status quo. Your whole dignified silence act is just intellectual cowardice dressed up as wisdom." Intellectual cowardice? Washington's voice became dangerously quiet, the way it did in his most intense film roles. "Stephen, I've been fighting battles you can't even imagine long before you discovered that controversy could boost your ratings. I've used my career to tell stories about real people facing real struggles, not turning them into punchlines for late-night television." The audience was completely silent now, witnessing something unprecedented in television history. This wasn't the usual playful sparring between host and guest. This was two powerful men attacking each other's core professional identities with surgical precision. Colbert tried to regain control, but his anger had taken over completely. "Real struggles? You mean the struggles of a millionaire actor who gets to play pretend for a living? Your biggest challenge is deciding which mansion to sleep in tonight." Washington stood up abruptly, his chair rolling backward with the force of his movement. The camera operators scrambled to adjust their shots, unsure whether to follow his movement or stay focused on Colbert's shocked face. "That's exactly the kind of shallow thinking I'd expect from someone who reduces everything to sound bites," Washington said, towering over the desk now. "You don't know what I've faced, what I've fought for, or what I've sacrificed. You just see the success and assume it came easy." Colbert rose from his own chair, trying to match Washington's physical presence, but falling short in every way that mattered. "Don't lecture me about sacrifice. I've built my career on speaking truth to power, even when it's uncomfortable." "Speaking truth?" Washington laughed, but there was no humor in it. "You've built your career on preaching to the choir, telling Your audience exactly what they want to hear, so they'll keep watching. That's not truth-telling, Stephen. That's just another form of entertainment. The words hit like hammer blows. Every criticism struck at the heart of Colbert's self-image as a fearless truth-teller. His face contorted with rage and wounded pride as he searched for a response that could salvage his dignity. "At least I have the guts to take a stand," Colbert snarled. "At least I'm not hiding behind some fake nobility while the world burns around us. Your silence isn't wisdom, Denzel. It's complicity." Washington's eyes blazed with fury. The accusation of complicity in societal problems cut deeper than any personal insult could have. His entire career had been built on portraying characters who fought against injustice, who stood up for what was right, even at great personal cost. "You want to see me take a stand?" Washington said, his voice carrying a threat that made everyone in the studio tense up. "Here's my stand." Washington stepped closer to Colbert's desk, his presence filling the space between them with electric tension. The cameras captured every micro-expression, every subtle shift in body language as two titans of their respective industries prepared for what felt like a final confrontation. "My stand is that you represent everything wrong with modern discourse," Washington declared, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to commanding respect. "You've turned important conversations into cheap entertainment. You've reduced complex human struggles into applause lines for your liberal audience." Colbert's face twisted with indignation. "How dare you lecture me about discourse while you sit in your ivory tower refusing to engage with the real world? At least I'm in the arena fighting, not watching from the sidelines with your hands clean." "Fighting?" Washington's laugh was sharp and bitter. "You call this fighting? Sitting behind a desk making jokes about people's pain? I've been in the real arena, Stephen. I've told stories about slavery, about corruption, about injustice. I've put my reputation on the line for roles that mattered, not for ratings that pay the bills." The audience had become completely silent, some covering their mouths in shock at the raw hostility unfolding before them. Production assistants stood frozen at their stations, uncertain whether they should intervene or document what might become television history. Colbert moved around his desk now, abandoning the last vestige of host protocol. "Your precious artistic integrity doesn't change the world, Denzel. My show reaches millions of people every night. I actually influence public opinion instead of hiding behind metaphors and character studies." "Influence?" Washington's voice rose to a level that sent chills through the studio. "You want to talk about influence? You've influenced an entire generation to think that snark and cynicism are substitutes for actual engagement. You've taught people that complex issues can be solved with clever one-liners and partisan applause." Colbert stepped closer, his own anger now matching Washington's intensity. "At least I'm not pretending to be above politics while secretly benefiting from the system I refuse to criticize. Your whole artist above the fray persona is just cowardice with better publicity." "Cowardice?" Washington's voice dropped to a dangerous whisper that somehow carried more menace than his shouting. "Stephen, I've faced real consequences for the roles I've chosen, the stories I've told. I've been blacklisted, criticized, threatened. What consequences have you ever faced for your safe, predictable liberal comedy?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. Colbert's mouth opened and closed several times as he searched for an answer that wouldn't expose the comfortable bubble he'd built around his career. "I face criticism every night," he finally managed, but even he seemed to recognize how weak it sounded. "Criticism from who?" Washington pressed, sensing weakness. "From other comedians? From Twitter trolls? When have you ever risked anything real for your convictions? When have you ever put your actual livelihood on the line for something you believed in?" Colbert's composure cracked completely. "I don't need to justify my courage to someone who spent his career playing it safe. You think making movies about historical injustices makes you brave? You're just performing someone else's bravery for profit." The accusation of performing bravery rather than living it struck Washington like a physical blow. His entire face changed, the controlled anger transforming into something much more dangerous and personal. "Performing bravery?" Washington repeated, his voice barely audible but somehow filling the entire studio. "You think portraying Malcolm X was performance? You think telling the story of soldiers who died for their country was performance? You think every role I've chosen to honor real people's sacrifices was just pretend?" Colbert realized he'd crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. Washington's films about historical figures weren't just entertainment choices. They were tributes to real people who had faced real consequences for their stands. To dismiss them as mere performance was to diminish not just Washington's work, but the memory of the people he'd portrayed. But Colbert was too far gone to retreat now. "Everything you do is performance, Denzel. Even this righteous indignation is just another role you're playing for the cameras." Washington's eyes went cold. The studio felt like it was holding its collective breath as everyone sensed they were witnessing something that would change both men's careers forever. "You want to see what's not performance?" Washington said, his voice carrying a finality that made everyone in the room understand that whatever came next would be irreversible. "Watch this." He turned toward the audience, then back to Colbert, his decision made. The cameras captured the exact moment when Hollywood diplomacy died, and something much more dangerous was about to be born. Washington faced the stunned audience directly, his voice carrying the full weight of his decades in Hollywood. "Ladies and gentlemen, you're witnessing something your host doesn't want you to see. You're seeing what happens when someone calls out the emperor for having no clothes." He pivoted back to Colbert, who stood frozen behind his desk like a deer, caught in headlights. "Stephen, you want to know what real courage looks like? It's not hiding behind a comedy show making safe jokes for people who already agree with you. Real courage is what I'm doing right now, telling you the truth about yourself on your own show." The audience remained silent, transfixed by the raw honesty unfolding before them. Some had their phones out, recording what they sensed would become legendary television footage. "You've built your entire career on the premise that you're speaking truth to power," Washington continued, his voice gaining strength with each word. "But you're not challenging power, Stephen. You are the power. You're part of the same entertainment machine that profits from keeping people angry and divided." Colbert tried to interrupt, but Washington raised his hand with such authority that the host actually stopped mid-word. "I'm not finished," Washington said with quiet intensity. "You want to talk about using platforms responsibly? Let's talk about how you use yours. Every night, you tell your audience that the other side is evil, that compromise is weakness, that anyone who doesn't share your exact worldview is an enemy of progress." The studio was so quiet that the hum of the cameras seemed deafening. Washington's words carried the weight of someone who had finally decided to burn every bridge in the name of truth. "You've convinced yourself that mockery is activism, that cynicism is wisdom, that your partisan cheerleading is somehow noble. But all you've really done is make it impossible for decent people to have honest conversations about difficult topics." Colbert found his voice, but it came out as a croak. "You don't understand the responsibility I have to—" "Responsibility?" Washington cut him off with devastating precision. "Your only responsibility is to your ratings and your ego. You've turned political discourse into a blood sport for your entertainment, and you've convinced yourself you're doing God's work." The cameras captured every moment as Washington delivered what felt like a final judgment. "The tragedy isn't just that you failed as a host, Stephen. The tragedy is that you failed as a human being. You've forgotten that the people you mock every night are someone's parents, someone's children, someone's neighbors." Colbert's face had gone pale, the fight completely drained out of him. He looked like a man watching his entire self-image crumble in real time. Washington turned back to the audience one final time. "I came here tonight to talk about a film that celebrates human dignity in the face of adversity. Instead, I've been subjected to the kind of shallow, divisive rhetoric that's poisoning our culture." He looked directly into the main camera, speaking to the millions watching at home. "To everyone watching, I want you to know that not everyone in Hollywood thinks you're stupid. Not everyone believes that entertainment should be used as a weapon against your neighbors. Some of us still believe in treating people with respect, regardless of their politics." The silence stretched on as Washington straightened his jacket and prepared to leave. Colbert made one last desperate attempt to salvage something from the wreckage. "Denzel, wait." Washington turned back with a look that could have melted steel. "I'm done waiting, Stephen. I'm done being polite while people like you tear this country apart for profit." With that, Washington walked toward the exit, his footsteps echoing through the stunned studio. The audience began to murmur, some applauding hesitantly, others sitting in shocked silence. As he reached the edge of the stage, Washington paused and delivered his final words without looking back. "Next time you want to lecture someone about courage and conviction, take a long look in the mirror first." The studio doors closed behind him with a sound that seemed to echo through television history. Colbert stood alone behind his desk, his show in ruins, his reputation shattered by a man who had finally decided that some things were more important than Hollywood politeness. The cameras kept rolling, capturing Colbert's attempt to regain composure, but the damage was irreversible. Within hours, clips of the confrontation would be trending across every social media platform. The entertainment industry would spend weeks dissecting every word, every gesture, every moment of the most explosive television confrontation in recent memory. For Washington, it was a career-defining moment that would overshadow any film he'd ever made. For Colbert, it was the beginning of the end of his reign as late-night television's moral authority. The confrontation had exposed something ugly about modern entertainment culture, and there was no going back.